All right, so again, I would like to welcome everyone, all my South Carolina realtors, to today's webinar, zipTMS Transaction Management Next Level. Again, my name is Laura Clark Prasad. I am pleased to be your host today. A quick overview of what we are going to be covering in today's webinar. We are going to talk a little bit about zipTMS functionality and just a quick review of what that means. Then we'll be looking and taking a little bit deeper dive into our agent dashboard and how you can populate some of those graphs. And the cool thing about the agent dashboard is that you're not really inputting any information. It's all coming directly from info you would be putting in your contracts or transactions. So we'll talk a little bit about that in today's session. We'll also revise a previous template. I will show you how to include a checklist and set that up with due dates. And then we'll also be talking about how to create and manage new and existing tasks, view zipForm Plus applications, and also review transaction-specific tabs. So a decent amount to cover today. I am going to see if we can probably, based on our objectives, wrap it up about 5-10 minutes early. I know everyone has things that they need to do, so we'll try to keep this as brief as possible. Okay, so first and foremost, what is zipTMS? Well, zipTMS is a transaction management system, hence the TMS. It is built into zipForm Plus, so it is part of member benefit through South Carolina Realtor Dues and through your membership with the National Association of Realtors. Get this totally free. Everything that I'm showing today, nothing is a paid upgrade. You already have all of these features. zipTMS helps to optimize workflow. It's also, as I mentioned, built into zipForm Plus and really lends itself to a greater degree of consistency in transaction management. With zipTMS, you're going to be able to track all components of your transactions. And what that includes is things like your listing date, your closing date, any key monetary values, and any transaction statuses, statuses. And we'll talk a little bit more when we get into our agent dashboard. All right, so we're going to begin today by signing into your zipForm Plus account. So I'm going to just switch screens. And here I've signed into an individual agent zipForm Plus account, which is what most of you will probably have. Now, this individual agent zipForm account has a couple of features that I just want to highlight with respect to zipTMS. One is all the way over on the left-hand side of the screen, we have our dashboard. We'll be coming back here, but this is what I was talking about just a moment ago. With your transaction information, you can actually populate this area of the dashboard and get all of these numbers and figures to flow over here. And so when the time comes that maybe you want to run a report or want to just see what the closing date was or some specific stats on a deal, you can come to the dashboard and retrieve that information. And again, just a brief recap of what we have talked about in previous sessions. Your transactions home landing page is where you're going to land when you sign into your account. And I'm actually just going to quickly sign out, which you would do by clicking on that me icon and just clicking on sign out. That's going to take you again to the front end of your zipForm Plus account. And you can enter in your username and password there. And how to do this is going to be, sorry, skip over that. How you would do this is going to be outlined in previous sessions. If you have any questions or have not yet set up your zipForm Plus account, please let me know in the question box and I will get with you via email to make sure you know how to do that. So at any rate, as I was saying, we land on the transactions home landing page when we sign into zipForm Plus. And transactions function as unique client and property combinations housed within a file, or what you may more commonly refer to as a deal. So we have transactions for our residential purchases when we're working with a buyer. We have them for our listings when we're working with a seller. So all of the files that you're looking at are essentially just consolidating information for each of your deals. That working on more than one deal simultaneously, you can juggle all those and keep track of all of that information right here. All right, and a couple people have typed in saying that they need to know how to set up their zipForm account. I'll circle back to that at the end of today's session just to show anyone. I can also shoot you a quick email and we can go over that together after today's session. To the right of transactions is templates. We're going to be working a little more in this area today because templates encompass a lot of what the zipTMS transaction management functionality is all about. It's all about saving you time and being able to streamline your workflow so that you're able to access information and also repurpose information. And a template is a really great example of that in action or in work. So we have this buyer template here that we've created. I created this actually in a previous session with South Carolina. The reason that I've created what we call this template is to add forms that I would be commonly using every time I'm working with a buyer. And in that regard, I will be able to repurpose these forms over and over whenever I work with a buyer for multiple transactions. You can also create a template for if you're working on a new listing. You can create a template that's going to encompass just listing contracts. And again, in that way, you'll be able to repurpose that information over and over. So we're going to circle back to templates in just a couple of minutes. A lot of times when people ask about zipTMS, they say, what do I have to activate this, or where do I locate this feature? And the thing about zipTMS is it's a little bit nebulous. It exists in a lot of different areas of zipForm Plus. So it exists in the repurposing of information for templates, it exists in the data flow over to the dashboard, and it exists in being able to streamline your action items into checklists and tasks. So again, the real goal, if anyone ever asks, what is zipTMS? It's a time-saving tool that's built in zipForm Plus, and that's really just the gist of what it is and what its purpose is. To the right of templates is a newer feature. Some of you may have seen this. It was released after last month's webinar with South Carolina, so you may not have had a chance to explore this yet, but this is a feature called Doc Inbox. Doc Inbox allows you to add documents or upload forms. As you can see right over on the left, we have this add document area. And Doc Inbox serves as a temporary placeholder for forms. Now, maybe later on, we're going to take these forms and move them to a transaction, which incidentally, you can also do on the right-hand side of the screen by clicking on transactions and selecting a transaction to which you would like to move your documents. So Doc Inbox is simply just a temporary holding cell for any forms that you've uploaded. Say, for example, you have an attorney letter, you've just uploaded a copy or scanned a copy of this into zipForm, and you're going to be working with that a little bit, and then later on you can add it to a transaction. But that's true of any form. To the right of Doc Inbox is tasks. I touched on this briefly in our last zipTMS webinar. What this is an area validate all of your task action items into one convenient hub. It's very much like the dashboard in the sense that it is a global area. Every task that you're seeing here belongs to a specific transaction, but they may not all be for the same transaction if you've created multiple deals. So you can see that for each of these tasks, I can see the transaction name that they actually belong to. So this one belongs, for example, to my transaction 1325 Warren Avenue, whereas I have other ones that belong, for example, to this one, 42 Wallaby. So each of these action items belong to a different transaction. That's going to make a little bit more sense once we get into our templates and transaction section of today's webinar. Just as an added bonus, if you like this task functionality, but you perhaps already store your action items on a calendar outside of zipForm Plus, we have integrations with Google Calendar and Microsoft Calendar. I myself am a big Gmail user. I like to utilize my Google suite of products. So if I want to, I can click on Google Calendar, and it's going to allow me to sign in to my outside Google account, at which point once I do that, it's going to sync up all of those Gmail or Google Calendar tasks with my zipForm Plus account. And this will stay for the remainder of my active session. Once I sign out and sync back in, and sign back in, pardon, I need to sync those again. And to the right of tasks is contacts. Contacts is where you would store or add in all of your individual services, entities, companies whom you correspond with on a basis. So maybe it's a cooperating agent, maybe it's your buyer, maybe it's even a title company. That information can be input here just by clicking on New. And then it gives you a pretty standard contact window where you can add information. So this is something that's not unlike maybe an address book in your email or perhaps your contacts in your. However, again, we do have this cloud integration option where if you don't want to go in and add every single contact in zipForm, maybe you already have them on an outside cloud provider. I can click on Google Contacts and I can sync my outside contacts in my Gmail. We also have integrations for Microsoft Contacts, Yahoo, Moxie Engage, which is part of the MoxieWorks CRM, and Top Producer. So you can pull in contacts from outside with any of those providers, or you can just stick with your ZipLogix contacts. And then to the right of contacts is partners. Partners showcases all of our service providers or outside integrations with other companies. Around 70% of these are free to our users, so make sure to check these out and just see if there's anything that might be useful to you. There are a lot of great partners here. For example, you can order a title from right inside of zipForm. You can also find checklist items that are going to streamline your transaction process. So a lot of cool things here, and you can click on learn more for any of them if you would like to get more information on that partnership. And the reason that I point this out is simply if you're new to zipForm, sometimes where to click can get a little bit disorienting. And that's why I just like to showcase what all of these tabs up the navigation bar do. That way, if you're saying, oh, today I want to go in and create my template, you know exactly where to go, which in this case would be to templates. Now, in our last session, I created a buyer template, and we'll just review how I did this. I'm going to go and add a checklist to the template. So in order to create this template that you see in the upper left here, I simply clicked New, and then I chose what of the deal I want this template to be for. Will it be for my new listings? Will it be for my new offers? Or if I work with rentals, will it be for a new lease or a new lease listing? So each of these represents a different side of the deal. I would strongly recommend against combining your templates, combining contracts for a buyer when you're representing a buyer and when you're representing a seller. It can just get a little bit convoluted that way. So the easiest way, if you work with both buyers and sellers, is to create a new listing template and a new purchase or offer template independent of each other. So let's say I were to say new purchase or offer. First, I want to create my template for my buyer. So I'm just going to call this the same thing. Really just creating a facsimile of what we already have down here just to show you how that process would go if you weren't on the last webinar where we talked about TMS. Property type, I am going to select residential in this case. If it were a different property type, you can see I also have a number of options from which to choose. And then my scope is automatically going to default to personal if I'm in an individual agent account. These global and office options are only enabled inside a brokerage. So this is something that probably won't pertain to most of you. If you do have a brokerage multi-user account, feel free to let me know. I can email you and we can work through what would be the best process for you to create templates for your agents. And then below you have your auto apply option. Auto apply basically lets you determine how often and to which transactions you would like this template to be applied. If I keep it as do not automatically apply this template to new transactions, it's going to let me decide on a case-by-case basis when I create a transaction exactly what template I would like to apply, whether it's this one or none or a different one. Another option that we have is automatically apply this template to purchase residential new transactions. That means that when I create a transaction and establish it as not only a purchase or offer, but also as a residential property, the system is going to go, oh, we have a template that needs to be applied to this type of transaction because it met those two conditions, and to apply the content of this template to your new transaction. Again, saving you a lot of time because you've already consolidated the forms. You can also choose to select a template and add it to another template. I'm going to choose this transaction checklist template. What I did was created a template that was very, very generic and had all of my action items from listing to in it. That way I can use those checklists and I can apply it to whichever deal I'm working on. So we'll go ahead and save, and if you don't have another template that you want to add to the one you're creating, that is absolutely fine as well. We'll click save, and that's going to launch us into our brand new template. Here we can add documents for the buyer side of the deal. I'm going to click on terms and find South Carolina. And one disclaimer, I'm not super familiar with all of the nuance of the forms, so don't take anything that I'm adding right now as gospel. Make sure to talk to your broker if you have any questions about which forms you would need to use. All right, so I'm going to add this cover sheet as well. Buyer agency, lead-based paint, inspection report. It should probably be good. All right, so what I can do with these documents now is I've added them to this template so I can ensure that every time I work on a transaction or a deal where I'm working with a buyer, I'll have all of these forms that will be added automatically. If I want to, I can go one step further and actually open these forms. And remember, I'm still inside of this setting it up. And I can make some time-saving entries that will carry over to the transaction. A word of caution, I would recommend staying away from any information that is transaction specific. So for my buyer and tenant information, just because I'm working with Joe Buyer right now doesn't mean I'll be working with the same buyer next time. So I want to keep this information pretty generic and clear so that I can customize it based on the transaction. So the same is true for property information. I do have selling broker information. This actually carried over from a different form. Normally when I set up a template, this would not be here, but I can go and enter this information in. This is going to be information that is consistent from transaction to transaction. And since this is going to be information that pertains to me, it makes sense that I would add this into a template. Listing broker information, sometimes that's an unknown. We don't know who our listing agent is going to be, so we're going to leave that blank. Closing information, if we have a closing company, we can add that in. All right. And apologies for my Detroit area code, but I don't know what the South Carolina area codes are. All right, so I just saved this, and now this information is going to carry over to multiple transactions of the same type. And I'm going to pause for, Elaine has asked a good question. She asked, can you copy a transaction, say the last listing you did, to the template section to save time? I understand you would need to modify the cover. Yes, so you can copy transaction information provided that it's going to be generic. So if you want to kind of bring over information from a transaction, you just sure that it isn't something that's specific to the property or to the people you're working with, because then next time around you go to use this template, you want to make sure that you can repurpose it. I hope that kind of makes sense. If I didn't get the question right, please let me know. So once we've made some entries in, for example, this cover sheet, I'm able to open up a different form. Let's try this closing checklist, for example, and you can see that some of the information has carried over. That's because with zipTMS functionality, if I'm entering information into one field that requests a specific piece of information, it's going to populate every other field within forms that request that same information. In this case, that was the buyer's agent information that carried over. The same is going to be true of, hopefully, this form. This may not be a good example. Let's try a different one. So here's a different one and a different example of the selling brokerage that has actually carried over into this exclusive agency buyer agency contract. So in that vein, when you enter in information, if a different form requests that same information, it is going to carry over. And this can be a great time-saving feature. Now moving over to parties at the left of documents, and we're still in the template at this point, you can see that a couple parties have been generated based on time-saving entries we made in the forms. So whenever we open this template, we know that these are the individuals or names that will remain consistent throughout the course of our use of this template. If we move to the right of documents, we see our checklist. Now this checklist was actually added in when I added the existing template to this template. Had I not done that, I could build a checklist. But I want to show you what the checklist looks like, what a more robust checklist would look like inside of a template. I've created this dummy checklist from listing to closing. So I have my pre-approval with my tasks there, marketing, closing tasks, post-closing, pre-closing, inspections, and then after purchase agreement assigned. And if and this is actually a sample checklist I use, but if you think this is helpful to you, please let me know in the question box. I'll be happy to send you over. It's just a PDF, but it's a copy sample checklist would look like. All right. So how did this checklist get here? Well, originally when I went and created a template checklist, I went and I clicked on new checklist to start off. New checklist is going to let me establish what you're seeing down here, which is the checklist name. So maybe I would call this buyer responsibilities. And the beauty of checklist too is that there is no naming scheme for your checklist, so you can customize it exactly to what you would want. If I click save, that's going to save up this brand new checklist. It's going to be reflected all the way at the bottom of the page. And then I can create a new task. For example, I'm going to create a new task and say, obtain cashier's check for closing. And then I can set a due date. I can either set it as none, which is because then in my transaction, I can just establish when it is. I can also set it as relative. So I could set this for, say, 5 days before the closing date. I can even assign a responsible party. In this case, that would be my buyer, but we're going to keep things very simple and just go ahead and save. And I would repeat that process to add additional tasks. So I can again create a new task and add in contact title officer. I'm going to set this as none and save, but just to show you how that would look and how I would build out that checklist. Now, if we want to go one step further, we can get kind of fun with it and color code it as I've done up here. And this is just more of an aesthetic preference. It does also help to break up that monotony between checklists. So if I have this little pen icon on the green and I delete untitled, and I'm going to just same thing, but you name your category, and then you're able to select a color for the checklist. So let's go ahead and do a teal, a nice teal color. We're going to click save, and you can see that that has adjusted that color coding. So it takes 2 seconds, and it's just something fun to do if you want to liven up the page. So that is how you would create a checklist and also just how a more robust checklist would look. And again, we have documents, and we also have our parties that are attached to this template. So now that we've created this template for a residential purchase, let's see what happens next time I go to create a deal. Let me just make sure. A couple more questions have come in. A couple people have asked for that PDF and sample checklist, so I will absolutely send that to you after today's webinar. I have everyone's email from the registration, so I'll just send that over to you. Okay, so let's say that I just got into the office and I've received an email or voicemail from a potential buyer, maybe interested in putting an offer on a property they saw. What I'm going to do, and I can establish my own process for this if I want to get that agency agreement signed before I go and start a transaction, I can do that. Or I can create a transaction and later on just mark it as a prospect. And in that way, I at least have an area or a file that I can consolidate all of this buyer's information in. So once I click new transaction, in this scenario, we'll say, because I am working with a buyer, it's a new purchase or offer. Were I working with a seller, of course, I could select new listing, or if I were working with rental properties, new lease or new lease listing. Let's click new purchase or offer. And I am going to name my transaction. The naming scheme that I actually prefer is usually just the name of the property. The reason that I choose this is because a lot of times we'll be entering in address information, or if I'm using something like zipForm MLS Connect to pull in information as well, I want to be able to have that match up to the name. If you don't want that naming scheme, you can definitely name your transactions whatever you feel comfortable with. I know that a lot of people prefer to name the transactions after the buyer name or the seller name. It's absolutely fine too, and you can go and change that at any time. Now moving down, I am going to select this property type as residential. I want you to watch the bottom of the screen when I click on that. Okay, so because I met those two conditions, number one, that it's a new purchase or offer, and number two, that it is residential, it took that template that I told you and it automatically connected in order to establish that template as part of this transaction. So the zipForm system is smart, and zipTMS functionality is also smart. It knows that if a transaction meets specific criteria that you've set out, to automatically apply the template. Now, a newer feature here that it's actually pretty recent within the last month or so is that you can set your transaction status right from the main page. So if this were a prospect, like we haven't actually gotten that agreement signed yet, but I just want to get something inside of zipForm Plus for them, I can mark the transaction as a prospect as well. And later I can go and switch the status. And this is really not going to be for much but your reference, but later on you'll see that a transaction status is a really fundamental feature in order to get your agent dashboard to populate. All right, so let's scroll down and then we're going to click Save. And now because this was a residential purchase, it has automatically applied the template that we just set up. We'll see that some information has already populated over, for example, the escrow officer. And if we even click on more parties on the left here, you can also see that selling agent as well as title company. So that was the transaction summary, and that's, oops, sorry about that. That's what you're going to see immediately after you click on a transaction. I'm going to just refresh this page so that 1, 2, 3 place is showing. I've circled back to my transactions home landing page. I can click on 1, 2, 3 property place and open it up, and we'll be in the same place left off. So just to recap, this is the transaction summary. This is where all of the very basic information about this dealer transaction is going to reside. So I'm going to put in the street address here. One important thing to note is that you can also enter this information into one of your contracts. It really does not make a difference. Let's do a year built. And then you can just click Save. Now, if you see the fields like this, you're trying to click to edit. Obviously, you're not able to. That is because you need to click the little pen icon in order to render these fields editable. Once you've made any adjustments, just click Save again, and that will lock the information into the fields. Below the purchase summary, the reason that this is displaying first is obviously because of the transaction type. It is a purchase. If I had created a listing or were working with a seller, I would see the listing summary appear at the top, where then the purchase summary would be demoted to the bottom. And that's just to keep the most relevant information right at your, so you don't have to go and look for it. We'll click on this edit icon again, and I'm going to enter in information. I'm just going to click and it gives me a calendar view. I'm going to say the offer date was today, July 11th. We'll say the offer expiration date is in 2 weeks on the 25th. Okay, we'll say the offer has been accepted. We'll say that happened on the 12th. So we're time traveling a little bit. We'll say that the date of contract was also on, and that the purchase price currently is set at $300. Now maybe that's going to change counteroffer. That's absolutely fine. If it does, we can come in here and adjust that information. Let's do one more. We're going to say the closing date is set for we'll say 28th. Now I'm going to click Save. Once I do, again, it locks in all of that information. So now that I've added a little bit of information that describes what exactly my transaction is, and also we've applied this template, we'll be able to see a lot of that reflected as we move through these transaction-specific tabs. For example, if I click Parties to the right of Summary, I'll see the parties reflected that were part of my template. But now I can go one step further, and because I know who my buyer is, I've already added all of this information that was generic for my template, but I can now click Buyer 1, and I can now add my buyer's name in. All right, and if I want to, I can even click Save as Contact. That's going to take Bob's information and going to allow it to flow up to my contacts area on my navigation bar we were looking at earlier. That way, Bob's information isn't only locked into this transaction as a transaction party, but if I ever need it again, it's also now reflected in my global contacts. I almost said contracts, so my global contacts. Down at the bottom, we click Save. And that saves and locks in Bob's information. Now Bob's information, because I've added it here, is going to be reflected now in all of my contracts. Let's go over to Documents, which is one tab further. If I open any of these, for example, this cover sheet, and scroll up, I can see now that Bob's information is reflected there. Let me try to make this a little bit bigger. I know that's kind of small to see. So Bob's information is shown under the buyer or tenant 1 information. This workflow would have been the same had I opened a contract first and entered in Bob's information. I'll show you what I mean. Let's say that Bob is purchasing a house with his wife, Brenda. So we're going to enter Brenda's name and again, all of the information associated with her, which for the sake of time, I'm not going to fill all of that out. But if we click Save, and then we exit this form, we'll see that first of all, if we open, for example, this exclusive buyer agency contract, Bob and Brenda are both reflected in here, even though we have not yet opened up this template or opened up this contract, pardon me. But if we go back to parties, we'll also see that Brenda is reflected there. So because we made that entry in the contract, Brenda's information has now moved over to the parties area, and that would be the same if I were to start in parties. And that's kind of a cool feature, again, of that zipTMS functionality. You fill information in one place, it's going to update all places that require it. So we have my documents. I have documents that have come over from both of my templates that were applied. If I want to add additional forms, I can do that. I can click on all forms, access my South Carolina library, and click to add additional forms in there, like so. And this will do that all without altering the original template. So next time when I go to apply those same templates, they're not going to have these additional forms that I'm adding. Those are just specific to the transaction itself. I can also add documents such as a PDF if I want to, just by clicking Add Doc. From here, I can browse for a document. That would be like pulling something in from my computer. You can see here it says Browse for a file. So I'm going to go and locate a file that I want to pull in here. And I just click OK, and that's going to upload that PDF. You can see if I scroll down, that home inspection report is now right down here and reflected in the transaction. I can also use Add Doc to do a number of other things, including creating a placeholder. Placeholders are actually, and I probably should have gone into this in templates, placeholders are a really great tool if you're just looking to remember that you have to add a specific form. For example, an attorney letter. Maybe I want to create a placeholder for that. You can see that I've done that already right down on the left. My attorney letter placeholder, there's nothing here right now, but once I upload that document, I can simply click here and I can browse for it and add it right into my transaction. And in that way, I'm never going to miss a step when it comes to various contracts or forms that I have to add in here. All right, to the right of documents is the checklist, and you can again see that the checklist from the template has automatically populated this transaction. Pretty cool. So I know exactly what I need to do as far as action items go. All I need to do is establish due dates. Speaking of dates, you'll notice that transaction dates have populated this checklist area as well. That's as we entered in those key transaction due dates on the summary. Incidentally, this would also be the case if I had entered these dates into the contracts. They populate this area. This is just to keep you on top of exactly when the key most important dates are. You can also locate a key right at the top of the checklist area that will tell you that the star does indeed denote transaction dates. And these are going to come into play in a couple of moments when we talk about our agent dashboard, which I think is where we're going to be kind of wrapping it up today. So for our pre-approval or marketing, that would really be more for, there are some of these that would really be more for a seller's agent. Obtain cashier's check for closing. I had set a relative due date of 5 days before the closing date. Being that we established the closing date as July 28th, this has now automatically converted the due date within the context of this transaction. So that's one cool thing about creating a relative due date. And if this doesn't work out and things get pushed back, I can always click on this and I can adjust from 5 days before the closing date to perhaps a fixed due date of, say, July 25th. And again, that will not alter the original template. Your water bill, I can change that. I can establish any due date that I want just by clicking on fixed. And if something needs to be changed, I can select a different date. What we're looking at right now is our task in what is called list view. However, if you prefer a calendar view, that is available to you as well. You can simply click on calendar in the upper left, and that's just going to showcase all of those same items, but actually on a calendar so you can get an idea of how close or far apart some of these due dates are. Now, you can see the blue dates. What's going to happen with those is because those are key transaction due dates, if something is relative to, say, the closing date, if we push the closing date back, and we can do that by just dragging and dropping, moving it to the 31st, you can see that a lot of things shifted. That's because a lot of our checklist items were relative to the closing date. So once we move the closing date, all of those items are also going to adjust on our calendar. All I had to do is move one date and everything adjusted with it. For the things that are not key transaction due dates, you can simply drag and drop them. It will not affect any other due date on the calendar. This is in a month view. I can also view my items, action items, in a week view or in a day view. So that is your checklist area. And you will also notice in just a moment, I'm going to move up to tasks. You'll notice that all of these checklist items are reflected in my global tasks. So that's what I meant earlier by all of your checklist items from various trends are going to flow up into your tasks. That way you have two ways to view your action items. Number one is by opening a transaction and looking at the checklist for that specific transaction, or you can go to task and get a global overview of everything that you have to do if you're working on simultaneous deals. One last thing I want to draw your attention to is just the history tab. Notes is pretty self-explanatory. It's just writing a little sticky note to your tagging it for this transaction. Services is going to be all of your partner integrations that are really hypothetically applied to the transaction so that if you want to use any of those services, you're able to. But neither of those are part of zipTMS functionality. One of the things that is, however, is transaction history. Transaction history is going to keep what is essentially an audit trail of all of the events that have occurred since this transaction's inception, which, as we can see, was about 11 minutes ago. Since then, I've added a form, I've added a document, I've set a new due date. So it tracks all of our information in this kind of tidy audit trail. So if we ever need to access that, we can do that right under our transaction history. All right. Let's go back to our transactions page. So now if we move over to tasks to the right, we'll also see that all of our tasks now for 123 Property Place are reflected here. You can see that there are a number of those. Of course, not discounting transactions where we already had tasks over here. This is simply adding 123 Property Place. So I can go right here and see all of my tasks for simultaneous deals or transactions I may be working on. If I go to month view, this is very similar to the checklist. I can see it in a month or also a day view. And you can also set a transaction status. If this is complete, verify to close with lender, I can simply click on the dropdown and change it from not started to completed. Incidentally, you can also click on this little, it's a little bit grayed out, but this little check mark on the left side to quickly mark it as complete. Now let's say something is in progress. I can change that status to in progress or not applicable. So whatever the case may be, this is going to affect the data that is pulled into the agent dashboard. So whenever you mark a task status, it's going to adjust that information in the agent dashboard. And I'll show you what I mean. So again, just as a brief kind of recap, your transactions each have a checklist inside of them that is unique to that particular deal, but your tasks area is going to show you all of those checklists in one global hub. Let's go over to our dashboard and take a look. You'll notice that some things may have changed over here. An example of this is transactions that closed this month have now increased from 0 to 1. If we click on this widget, we'll see that in fact the transaction is 123 Place. So that is because I established a closing date of July 31st. Because that does fall within this month, it's going to notify me on my dashboard that this transaction is closing this month as well. This is a great way to run reports. I see transactions closing, and I'm just running that report in a 1 month span. That is the month of July. However, if I were to set that, say, as we'll do since the beginning of April and click Run Report, let's switch to a different option there. That's going to give us an idea of how many transactions fell within a certain time period. So I ran a report on active listings. You can also do pending transactions, closed, fell through, etc. So the agent dashboard is a really good tool to get an overview of everything that you've done throughout the quarter or throughout the year. You can also export these reports that you've run as a CSV file. That would be like an Excel spreadsheet. All it's going to do when I click on that is download this report down to the bottom here, and I can open it up in Excel format, Microsoft Excel. Let's return to the dashboard. And again, this is the agent dashboard is all zipTMS functionality at work. Almost everything here has to do with zipTMS functionality. And again, what that is the information you enter transactions populating other areas of zipForm Plus. For example, right here, we see that we have 0 quarterly sales. Our closed transactions year to date have been 6, but because this new quarter has kind of just started last month, it's still giving us a 0. Once we close a deal, that's going to change. So let's actually do that right now. 3 things to populate your agent dashboard. If you have a piece of paper, you might want to write this down. 3 pieces of data to populate this area are: number 1, your key transaction due dates. For example, transactions that close this month, because I have a key transaction due date of July 31st, it has populated this widget with that information. So one thing is key transaction due dates. The second thing is going to be key monetary figures. That would be like a listing price or a closing price. So anything that you enter into your contracts, that's what's going to populate these numbers here. The third thing is going to be transaction status. Depending on whether a transaction is open or closed or a prospect is going to affect how that transaction's information is relayed on the dashboard. Let's go back to 123 Property Place, which was our transaction for today. We can see we have a closing date of July 31st. Let's kind of flash forward and say that we're ready to close this deal. We want to scroll down ensure that we have all of the applicable information, such as our key transaction due dates. We also have our purchase price. If it were a listing, we would of course have our listing price. And then up at the top, I'm going to mark this from active, and I'm going to change this to a closed transaction. So I'm closed. It gives me a little bit of information about my retention period. That is simply how much time transaction is stored within zipForm. That varies by state, so if you have a question, you can either email me and I'll take a look. I don't remember off the top of my head what South Carolina's retention is. If anyone knows and wants to clue me in, that would be helpful, but otherwise I can look that up and send an email your way letting you know. Michigan, though, is 5 years, so it's showing me that from the date that this was closed, it's going to remain in zipForm Plus for 5 years. Now that I've marked that as closed, let's go back to the dashboard. You can see that my quarterly value has now increased based on that purchase price, and closing the transaction triggered this to populate with this value because it says, okay, this transaction has now been closed. Let's add it to the quarterly sales as well as the closed transactions. Incidentally, when we scroll down, you'll notice that transactions that closed this month have now back down to 0. That's because this transaction is now closed, so it leaves this widget and joins its friends up in closed transactions. From the dashboard, we also have a recent activity log. This is really not unlike the history tab that I was showing you inside of the transaction. The only difference is, again, much like checklist and task, this is a global area. So it doesn't just show you the history of one transaction, it shows you the history of all of your zipForm Plus transactions. One thing I really like about recent activity is that a lot of these hyperlinks are clickable, meaning that I can go and say, okay, I created this transaction, maybe I want to jump back in and change something. I can click on that and it's going to jump me right back into the transaction. So in this way, the dashboard and transactions create a continuous loop where you never have to go and search for something. You can access your transactions from the dashboard, so you can access your dashboard once you close or adjust something within your transactions. On the bottom of the agent dashboard is where tasks come in. You can see I have 10 tasks that are not started, 1 task that is in progress, and 3 overdue tasks. Now, if I click on those 10 tasks not started, the dashboard is going to again jump me back to that global tasks hub. I can scroll down and I can see which ones were not started. And I can change them, I can mark them as complete. I can leave them if at not started if that's the case, but I can also change the status of those based on what's applicable. I go back to my dashboard and I can still adjust those values from here. I can also view my forms from my dashboard as well as manage my transactions. These are simply just shortcuts that bring you to your forms library and to your transactions home landing page. Now you can also create a new transaction from your dashboard. That would be exactly the same process as we established on the transactions page. And the dashboard also gives you a distribution of property types you're actively marketing as well as active transaction types. And you can also access potential sales volume as it pertains to active listings and pending transactions. And don't forget, anytime you see this little arrow icon, it means that you can click and gain more information, even run a report on this specific information that the widget covers. All right. So I promised that I'd try to wrap it up a little bit early, and it does look like about ahead of schedule. So what I do want to do is open up for questions. If anyone has any questions, ask right now. Meanwhile, I will put up our product support information so that you can take that down if you would like to. Our customer care line is 586-840-0140. And they are there to assist you Monday through Friday, 24 hours, as well as weekends and holidays now 24 hours as well. So they are open around the clock. We are located again in Fraser, Michigan. If you have any questions about product pricing above and beyond what we covered today, you can feel free to email sales@ziplogics.com. Additionally, feel more than free to email me or my team at training@ziplog.com if you have any questions about what was covered today. For anyone who asked about those checklists, that is also the email that those will be coming from, so be sure to watch out for that. Oh, thank you. A couple people said thank you very much for taking the time to attend today's webinar. I know that your time is valuable, so we do appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to see what zipForm Plus can offer you. If you're on social media, feel free to connect with. You can like us on Facebook, connect with us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, or tag us on Instagram. And for more trainings, you can check out our website at www.ziplogics.com. And a couple questions. All right, thank you. Well, if anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out again to training@ziplogics.com. Again, a big thanks to everyone for joining me today. My name is Laura. It's been my pleasure to be your host, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.